So we're seeing a brand new, fresh wave of what people on the right might consider cancel culture. So look at this in Mediaite. New York Times writer resigns after reprimand for open letter declaring Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So let me give you the specifics of this. Writer Jasmine Hughes has resigned from the New York Times after being reprimanded for signing an open letter that declares Israel is engaged in, quote, genocide against the Palestinian people. The publication's magazine editor Jake Silverstein informed staff on Friday. Quote, while I respect that she has strong convictions, this was a clear violation of the Times policy on public protest. Stop and think about this. We're going to come back to this line in a second. Silverstein wrote, she and I discussed that her desire to stake out this kind of public position and join in public protest is incompatible with being a journalist at the Times, and we both came to the conclusion that she should resign. New York Times media reporter Katie Robertson posted the news in an understated article on the paper's website Friday, writing, Jasmine Hughes, an award-winning New York Times Magazine staff writer, resigned from the publication on Friday after she violated the newsroom's policies by signing a letter that voiced support for Palestinians and protested Israel's siege in Gaza. In fact, the letter Hughes signed begins with the sentence, Israel's war against Gaza is an attempt to conduct genocide against the Palestinian people. It was put out in late October by Writers Against the War on Gaza and posted on the group's website, which domain was registered on October 16th of this year, 9 days after Hamas terrorists launched a surprise attack targeting Israeli civilians for murder, kidnapping, rape, and torture. Interesting. They say it's a week after that, but they don't tell you what happened in that week. The rampant, brazen bombing of civilian targets. The medieval siege cutting off food, fuel, and water to all of Gaza. Okay, so look, this line is crazy. While I respect that she has strong convictions, this was a clear violation of the Times policy on public protest. Really? So you're not allowed to engage in any kind of protest, sign any issue-related letter. If you work at the New York Times, if you're a journalist, you're not allowed to do that? Well, what if somebody signed a letter denouncing Russia's illegal and offensive invasion of Ukraine that kills many Ukrainian civilians? Would they look at that and say, that's not allowed? No, that is literally the dominating ideology at the New York Times. That, of course, Russia's being aggressive. Of course, they're being offensive. Of course, they're illegally invading and occupying Ukrainian territory. Everybody agrees to that. If she signed that letter condemning Russia, it would have been, that's par for the course. That's fine. There's no problem with that whatsoever. But doing this, all of a sudden, oh, no, you can't do this. You can't express, you're going to express opinions as somebody who's in the media? How dare you? Guys, I don't know how to get this through to people. It's very simple. Being objective doesn't mean you have to be a robot who is neutral on everything, right? Being objective means you give people the facts, and if you think there's an obvious conclusion based on those facts, you can and should be allowed to say it, and you can and should be allowed to take moral positions on that information. This should be obvious. So is it the New York Times that, let's do a little thought experiment here. Is it the New York Times position that if somebody in 1940 signed a letter condemning Hitler's atrocities, now remember, at the time, we didn't have the full scope of everything he was doing. But if somebody, based on the information they had at the time, said, I am condemning Hitler for his atrocities, would they say, oh, you cannot, this is a clear violation of the Times policy on public protest. How dare you condemn Hitler? No, they would have been like, well, of course, that's the most obvious conclusion in the world. You should sign that. So here's the thing. They're pretending like, oh, we're just totally non-ideological and neutral. No, you're not. You just don't agree with her conclusion, which is why you're effectively firing her. I don't believe that she resigned. I believe they put pressure on her to resign. Which means you're the problem. You're doing cancel culture. This is authoritarian. You're not allowed to have this opinion. We don't agree with this opinion. And instead of being adults and saying, okay, I'm going to write an article countering her take, which, by the way, it'd be wrong. The article would be wrong trying to counter her. But that would be a free exchange of ideas. That would be the marketplace of ideas working as it's supposed to, where the best ideas rise to the top. But they don't do that. They just put pressure on her to resign, effectively firing her. God damn it, man. This is so gross. It's also gross. Look, let's sanitize the language, right? Let's say I don't agree that they're doing a genocide or they're doing ethnic cleansing. Okay. What if she signed a letter saying, I condemn Israel's killing of massive numbers of innocent civilians? Will she have been fired for that too? Serious question. Because if you think, that term is just, that word is just too charged, right? There's too much baggage that comes along with that word. Okay, so what if instead of genocide we used ethnic cleansing? What if instead of ethnic cleansing we used killing massive numbers of civilians? At some point, when you change the language enough, you get down to an ironclad fact of reality that the New York Times just doesn't like. They just don't like it. They just don't want you pointing out inconvenient facts. And that is disgusting. That is anathema to what journalism is supposed to be. By the way, the New York Times has been some of the worst offenders now, where they sanitize the language of the Israeli war crimes. When it's describing Hamas's war crimes, it's Hamas targets innocents and kills and rapes and tortures and all that stuff. And all that's accurate. They should put that about Hamas. But when it comes to Israel, it's take Israel out of the title and say, a blast killed people at a refugee camp. It was a blast that got them. There was even one that said, Gazans say a blast was a bomb that killed. Sanitize it when it comes to Israel. When it comes to Hamas, all systems go. Brutal, direct language. No, you should use brutal, direct language in both instances. Neutrality is not the same as objectivity. Okay? Objectivity is good. Clear, direct language is good. Taking a moral stand when you think it's obvious is good. Even if people disagree, let them fight it out in the pages of the paper. I'm not done yet, man. So that's one example. Look at this, guys. Quote, it feels like the new McCarthyism, how the Israel-Hamas war is redefining the limits of free speech. In the age of social media, do employers have the right to fire employees for their political views? Free speech expert Genevieve Lakier says the rules are changing before our eyes. So there's even more examples of this exact thing, fired over this issue. War between Israel and Hamas has sparked extensive, mostly online activism about the conflict and led to a rash of firings or other workplace discipline from employers concerned about their employees' views on the conflict. Art Forum's top editor, David Velasco, was fired by his publisher, Penske Media, after posting an open letter on the site calling for a ceasefire and suggesting Israel is responsible for the beginning of a genocide. Fired for that. Michael Eisen was removed as editor-in-chief of the science journal eLife after retweeting a satirical article critical of Israel. Wow. And Meha Dakil, a top executive at the Hollywood talent firm Creative Artist Agency, CAA, stepped back from leadership roles after reposting an Instagram story that implied Israel was committing genocide. That's in addition to multiple law students who had job offers revoked after publicly criticizing Israeli actions. The statements range from expressions of sympathy for Palestinians to strident anti-Israel criticisms that seem to minimize Israeli loss of life. The situation is making Genevieve Lakier, a professor of law at the University of Chicago, whose work is focused on the changing meaning of freedom of speech in the United States, very nervous. Quote, it feels like the new McCarthyism, said Lakier, who's one of the leading legal scholars on the matters of free speech. So far, most of the firings appear to have been for expressing pro-Palestinian views. The U.S.-based advocacy organization Palestine Legal reports that they've responded to over 260 cases of people's livelihoods or careers being targeted. But the fact that these firings have been due in large part to social media posts and widespread broadcasting of personal political beliefs means that the trend may not stay on one issue or one side of a dispute for long. Lakier says that we are watching the relationship between free expression and employment shift in real time. So in other words, let me sum up what the argument is. The argument is, hey, should it really be allowed for your boss, the company you work for them to control your entire livelihood and cut it off based on the whims of you expressing a political opinion? Like, look, we all believe, or we should believe, in free speech at the government level, at the political level. But all that means is the government cannot throw you in jail or prison for expressing opinions, even if those opinions are unpopular, even if those opinions are wrong. That's all that means. They can't lock you up for saying something. There's very rare exceptions, but usually that's around like direct threats of violence and things of that nature, or defamation. Very rare exceptions, and the exceptions are good, but the overwhelming majority of the time, you can't just express an unpopular opinion and then the government locks you up. Okay, that's good. But you don't have free speech when it comes to the workplace. In the workplace, they could effectively cut off your livelihood, make it so that you might, lose your apartment, lose your house because you lost your source of income simply based off retweeting something or posting something on Instagram or saying something that people view as controversial. And the question is this really how we want it to work? Do we want to expand free speech rights into the workplace, or do we want to keep it the way it is, which is you have free speech in the political sphere, but in the economic sphere, there's no free speech at all. And it's authoritarian as it gets, and they'll shut you off, shut you down, fire you if you say one thing that they disagree with. So that's what the debate is. That's what the conversation is. But the substance of this is, if you're expressing pro-Palestinian sentiment, if you're criticizing Israel for genocide or ethnic cleansing, or maybe even if you water it down enough to just killing massive numbers of civilians, you might get fired. You might lose your livelihood. This is cancel culture. This is authoritarianism. And look, perhaps I'll go a step further than most. I would protect every single one of these 260 who were fired, no matter what they said. I would protect them. But the shoe's got to be on the other foot, too. If there's some psycho far-right Israeli supporter who says, I support the bombing campaign in Gaza, even though it's killing massive numbers of civilians, well, that should be protected, too. Because you shouldn't just get your livelihood yanked because you're an asshole, right? It shouldn't be that simple. Shitty people also need to put food on the table and survive. So, maybe I'm going further than most would on this issue, because I understand it gets sketchy and questionable once you get into, okay, well, what if somebody's openly a Nazi and they got a swastika shirt on and they're posting Hitler stuff 24/7 and they just go to work at Arby's, right? Like, should Arby's be able to say, oh, can you kind of clean up the Nazi stuff a little bit? We don't want to, sign off on that as a company. I understand it gets legally complex and nuanced, and there are some cases that are clearly cross a line. But I guess my point is, as much as humanly possible, you want to protect dissenting voices. Yes, there are exceptions. Yes, there are some things that go too far where a company doesn't want to sign off on, whatever. But just supporting Palestinians and just saying, hey, Israel's doing a genocide and I'm against it. Sorry, but as of right now, based on the evidence, that's a perfectly reasonable opinion. And I think a correct opinion. Even if you water it down a little bit, take out the word genocide, put in ethnic cleansing. Fair. Take out ethnic cleansing, put in just killing massive numbers of civilians. Literally nobody can disagree in good faith that Israel is killing massive numbers of civilians. It's obvious that's what they're doing, right? So, anyway, 260 people fired over this issue. New York Times employee resigns, effectively pushed out after saying, I'm against Israel's genocide in Gaza. This will be a stain on the New York Times' already stained legacy. And all these people who are rushing in to do cancel culture against pro-Palestinian voices, shame on you. You're wrong in terms of your reaction. You're wrong in principle, and you're actually wrong in substance too, which makes it doubly pathetic. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.